This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Kahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hey everybody, it's Dan Kahn with Only the Strong Survive, powered by Kahn Media and Tread Agency. We have a really cool episode for you today. It's one I've actually wanted to produce for a long time. We have gotten a lot of requests from people to do a specific episode about family businesses. So we found 3 amazing family businesses that are multi-generational, all in the automotive aftermarket, and we had their current leaders all on the show at the same time. So we have Melanie Hellwig from Hellwig Products, who's a 4th gen. We have Seth Glauberman from Malco Products, who's also a 4th gen. And we have David Borla from Borla, and he is a 2nd gen. And they are incredibly candid and transparent and vulnerable in this episode. And it was really a fun one to produce, and I can't wait for you to hear it. It was a really good one. But before we get into the episode, I did want to share some news that's pretty cool. I have mentioned in past episodes my new book, The Rules of the Road, How to Navigate the Rapidly Changing Marketing Landscape. It's been out for about a month and a half now on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. And the news is it is now a bestseller in 7 categories. So to all of you who have already bought the book, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you supporting what we're doing. If you haven't bought it or heard about it yet, it is available on Amazon. It's the #1 book on PR, communications, and marketing on Amazon right now. And it really tackles the way the media landscape has changed over the last couple of years. And whether you're a solo entrepreneur or you work for a major organization or even an agency or anything in between, and you're trying to figure out how to build a roadmap for tackling the changing PR and media landscape, how to work with influencers, how to build strategic marketing plans. There's workbooks and tips on the back of every chapter. I think you'll really get a lot out of it. So again, #1 in 7 categories, thanks to you. So thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope you enjoy the show. Today, we are diving into what it takes to build and, more importantly, keep a family business running strong for multiple generations. This is an episode that I've wanted to do, and we've actually had reader requests for quite some time. So I'm excited we got to do it. It's also our first time we're going to have 3 guests on the show at once, and I'm really excited to get into it today. So my guests today know exactly how to kind of weigh the balance of honoring a family legacy while also continuously evolving and growing a business, because they're all doing it firsthand. So to go through and introduce my panelists, first and foremost, we have David Borla, who is the CMO of Borla Performance Industries. David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We have Seth Glauberman, who is the CEO of Malco Products. Seth, thanks for being here.
Excited to be here.
And we have Melanie Hellwig, the CEO of Hellwig Products and soon to be the incoming chairperson of SEMA. Mel,
Yes.
Thanks for being here. All right. So David, Melanie, Seth, really glad to have you all here. Thank you for making the time. I know you're all very busy running very successful businesses. So just to get things started, I think most of our listeners probably know who most of you are, or at least your companies are. But just to kind of get all that out of the way, I think it'd be really important to tell your stories, not just about yourselves and your companies, but your legacy, because the multi-gen thing I think is really cool. So I would love to start by just kind of asking if you can share your company's history and how and when you got involved with it. So David, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. So we manufacture high-performance exhaust systems for cars and trucks, very much with the aftermarket flavor. Even the OE relationships that we have and work that we do is really with that aftermarket spirit. We also have a smaller division called Borla Induction, where we're doing electronic fuel injection conversion kits and individual throttle bodies. And more recently, we're doing sounds for EVs, external sounds, performance sounds, bringing that sort of visceral connection back in a very similar way with performance exhaust systems on EVs. And the business was founded in 1978 by my parents, Alex and Elise. I was 4 years old at the time. We started extremely small, or I say we, it was really they, important that I distinguish that they started it. It was just the 2 of them in a 1-bay, 1-story building in Brooklyn, New York. And we've built it all to the kind of brand that's pretty well known now, and there's a long story in between, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that, but that's the short story, skipping from 1978 all the way to today.
And Borla has facilities in I think Ventura County, California, and Tennessee. Is that right?
Yeah, in Oxnard, California, and Johnson City, Tennessee. We're doing sales, marketing, customer service, and new product development out in Oxnard, and then Tennessee is our manufacturing facility and headquarters, finance, and that stuff.
Great. Mel, you want to go next?
So Hellwig Products started in 1946. So my great-grandfather and grandfather started the company. And we started with helper springs. We later added sway bars. I got involved in the company 20 years ago. I just turned 20 this year in the company. And it's funny, we started the company, they like manufactured the product at night. So it was like their second job. And then on the weekends, they'd sell door to door. And then I came into the company and I did cold calling. So I feel like I did something kind of similar to that. Luckily, I had a very established brand at the time, but cold calling was still an interesting way to get involved in the company. So I started that 20 years ago.
And where are you guys based?
And we're based in Visalia, California.
Right on. And Seth.
So Seth Glauberman, Malco Products. Actually, I'm celebrating 20 years this year as well, Melanie. Our company was founded in 1953, actually by my grandfather. One of the unique things is the name. So it was Mal's Soap Company, and my grandfather wanted to have a family business. So the M is Murray, the A is Abe for my great-grandfather, and the L is Lionel, who was my great-uncle. So they're actually like in the name of the company. So I get to pivot between whether I'm a third generation or a fourth generation in the business. As I learned when I took over that my great-grandfather was actually named president, even though my grandfather Murray's the one that started the company. So I'm technically the third generation to really like lead the organization, but it's a fourth generation. My dad worked in the business for 50 years. He's now our chairman. I have my sister in the business too, who's our director of marketing and also my partner. We do awards for like kind of tenure. And I gave her the 15th anniversary award that was the same year I got mine. And I was like, but you weren't here when I started, but she actually worked one summer. So technically she has more seniority than me in the business, but it's great because I get to, as a family business, I get to have, she's one of my best friends. She's also my business partner. And it's awesome to see how her, along with our leadership team, can kind of drive this company forward.
And explain what Malco makes and does and where you're based.
Yeah, sure. So we're based in Barberton, Ohio, which is just south of Cleveland. We do automotive detailing products and marine detailing products. So anything that you could use to detail, restore the interior, exterior of your car, we make with a focus on the professional side. So it's the professional detailer that we're designing for. And then we also do specialty chemical manufacturing for Fortune 100 consumer product companies as well.
Awesome. First of all, really cool to have all three of you on the panel. So thank you for doing this. Open question for anyone who wants to answer, or all three of you. Did you know you would join the family business all along? Is this something you kind of grew up talking about at the kitchen table? Did you take a different path before you got involved? Like, what was your arc to getting involved in your company?
I had no idea that I was going to go into this business. So my generation, there's 9 granddaughters and 1 grandson. I actually ended up being the only one that really showed any interest in the business. I went to school, had my psychology degree, was going to go get my license for marriage and family therapy. I'm really glad I'm doing this instead, because this is really fun. We get to play with cars all the time. I get to go test suspension and stuff. I wanted to do outside sales. And so Hellwig had an opportunity. And I thought, well, I'll throw my name in. And I started doing that. And I fell in love with the industry and the people in it. And I couldn't go do anything else.
And was there any resistance from siblings or your parents, or were they like all in, like, hey, we're just happy to have you on the team? Or was anyone like, hey, hang on a second?
My family did a really good job. And I'm trying to do this because I have a son who's 15, loves cars. So he's super into like the industry, but he's sure he doesn't want to work with me is what he's sure at. But he's like 15, right? But what I think my parents did an excellent job at is there was no pressure. We kept, and we still do, we talk about like my sister's jobs and what they do, but we never talk about mine. So like Hellwig is sort of like the family business is off the table when we are at like family dinners. We don't talk about it at Thanksgiving. Like, we might talk about other people's careers, but we just keep it very separate for good reason, right? It's hard. I mean, family business, there's so much passion in it. And so in some ways, I think, yes, like I was a little bit discouraged, but maybe not discouraged. It was just, I was not encouraged. It was very neutral on whether or not my family wanted the next generation to get involved.
That sounds very healthy. But I know your parents a little bit. I'm not surprised because they seem very healthy. So that's cool. All right.
Yeah.
Both myself and I'll reference my sister too, because at the end of the day, we're both in this family business together. I would say both of us had a very similar kind of experience as Melanie in terms of like our parents wanted us to be able to choose our path and our passion. It just so happens that both of us ended up back in the business, and it was always there as an opportunity, but it was also we had to like it wasn't there as like a fallback plan. It wasn't there as like, hey, we have a company we can go to if we fail in another part of our life or path or journey. We both got here at like different ways. I mean, I'm an engineer, but I like sales and I like gray. And my sister's actually has a master's in teaching. But we both found ourselves back here. And what was great is we were welcomed here, but there was also high expectations that we were going to contribute and learn. I will say the only person that had pressure was my grandmother. So my grandmother, Lenore, who was married to Murray, anytime I saw her was like, oh, you're coming into the business, you're going to work in the business. But my parents really were like pushing us to like find our path. And if we ended up back here, my dad just wanted us to know we had the option to come back in. I will say, though, we have the opposite experience at our dinner table where we talk a lot about the business, and we talk a lot about the business among my sister and I and my wife and my parents. And it's so much a part of like who we are and how it fits into the community and with our employees and customers too.
I think it's a pretty similar situation for me and my brother. I like how Melanie articulated it when she said we weren't really encouraged or discouraged either way. And they really gave us the room to kind of grow and see what we were going to get into on our own. And my brother never showed an interest in the business and or really in cars in general. You know, my dad was the kind of guy that was always wrenching on cars, driving, riding motorcycles. And from the beginning, I took an interest in that. I think behind me, you can see a picture of us both riding motorcycles together. And there was always sort of that side of it. We would go riding dirt bikes out in the back and in Somis and Fraser Park and Gorman and, you know, all those places. And so we kind of had that common ground. I was always interested in whatever cars he had around. I also became really interested in music and playing drums, actually, strangely enough. So I wanted to go to a conservatory. My parents encouraged me to play music. It was really important to them that I got a more traditional education and degree. There was some pressure for me to go to a real four-year college, let's call it. So I wound up graduating from NYU with a marketing degree, not necessarily with the intent of getting into this business, but just having something that I could use as sort of a firm footing for a career if music wasn't really the path I wanted to take. When I graduated from NYU, I immediately went on the road as a touring musician. I'll just skip through this whole part, but I eventually like wound up getting a record deal and a publishing deal and had a fairly successful music career. When I was like 27 or 28, I kind of became a little disillusioned with touring. I'd done a lot of it and I was sort of worn out and I was becoming a lot more selective about the tours I was doing. And so my parents came to me and it was in the beginning, it was like sort of half joking. They'd be like, you know, we put you through school, you have this degree, let's get something for it. Why don't you come out here and sort of help with the family? It was offered to me sort of very organically. It was like, look, when you're not working, if you don't have a tour or whatever, why don't you come in here and apply your marketing knowledge? This was right around the same time that the first sport compact wave was coming. Fast and the Furious movies came out. And my parents, you know, talk a lot about the dinner table. It's come up a couple of times. These were sort of like dinner table type conversations where they'd say, you know, this is really the first time that they felt like they weren't completely in touch with the enthusiast. They came from more of the hot rod days and, you know, that kind of stuff. And there was this new wave of, and really, I don't know if you remember at the time, like mini trucks were kind of a thing. And it was like that whole thing that was coming up. So they were like, look, you're the right age. You have this marketing degree. Like, why don't you just start applying it? I'd work for a while and then I'd go on tour and then I'd come back. And over the course of maybe 3 or 4 years, I was just thinking about the business more than I was thinking about touring or playing music. It just sort of happened gradually to the point where I was just really excited to come to the office, turning down more and more work on the music side. Interestingly, I was also able to apply a lot of what I had learned about sound design and recording and acoustics and stuff to what we were doing, which was just sort of an added bonus. Somewhere around 2004, 2005, the gentleman that was running our sales department left. My parents came to me and they were like, do you want to run the sales department? And so pretty soon it was like sales and marketing. And then at that point, I just stopped touring and really got turned on by the business. So to their credit, they really left it open for me and let me sort of, you know, come to it. Clearly, they were capable of doing it without me. We're doing really well. And, you know, I stand on their shoulders and everything that they accomplished. You know, starting a business and that sort of initial curve is really hard to do. I will always benefit from the hard work that they did during those times. And I remember how difficult it was for them and what they went through and how smart they were and how hard they worked. And I could go on forever. You know, even though I've only been working here full time for like 25 years. And before that, it was part time. I mean, I used to come in and put clamps together. If they were in the office, you know, I'd come in and they'd be like, can you help? You know, I'd start putting clamps together or whatever. So I also had the opportunity, and I'm sure it's like that for Melanie and Seth too, to have seen the business even when I wasn't involved in it. And that is a really important perspective, I think, that we have as next generation. Yes, okay, there's this official time period that we've been working here, but we witnessed kind of a lot more than just that. For me, and I'm sure for you guys too, it's just always sort of a part of my thinking, no matter what I'm doing, that I'm a part of something a lot bigger and something that goes back a lot further than me. It's sort of humbling in a way, and I'm always sort of honoring or trying to honor what they did and the hard work that they put in to get to the point where I came in.
That's really well said.
David, it's interesting. I was kind of reflecting as I was listening to you, and there's kind of two things that really stood out. So I've got an 8 and a 12-year-old now. We talked about like, well, do you talk about business outside of business with your family? And I remember my dad, I never knew it, but my sister and I learned so much about the business just being around him. And like, we had international customers call all the time. And instead of my dad like going out to dinner with them, like they would come and have dinner at our house. I remember, Chief Paul from Nigeria coming and eating at our house. And I think I was like 8 years old, and we needed to talk about what our parents did at school. And this gentleman was visiting, and he was wearing all of his chief outfit from Nigeria. And he came in and was my show and tell person for the day.
Oh,
But
wow.
That's cool.
yeah, I think about it, and like we learned so much that we didn't even realize we learned just from being around our parents. And, now, like, so this week, literally, we just acquired a new company, and I drive my daughter to work. I mean, sorry, not work, her work, to school Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so we talk about like, what are you doing today? And she'll ask me, what am I doing? And I'm like, oh, today we're like announcing the acquisition. I mean, and literally when I say that, like that was today's conversation in the car because we announced the acquisition to all the customers today. So like it kind of came full circle. And David, you really made me think about it from like how much are like my kids, when Nora and I are talking about the business and, she's giving me advice or things that she can think about, that it really is a family business. And our kids are like, they ask me questions and I'm giving them like what I'm working on. And I'm telling my daughter like, hey, like this is confidential. Like you can't tell anyone about this. And then just the second thing that you talked about that I thought was so insightful was you talked about the responsibility. And I'm sure, Melanie, you feel the same way, that like we've inherited in terms of like, it's not just the business, but it's the family legacy, the employees, the community, how we support it. And I couldn't agree with that comment any more than what you shared, David.
That brings up a really interesting point that wasn't on my list of questions, but I want to ask it is, in all three of your cases, I do wonder how you, or if you think about, I assume you do, and how you sort of think about it, not only how you sort of carry the weight of a family legacy, but also in all three of your cases, you're major employers in your towns. So there is a community that's sort of for multiple generations. And I think, at least I know with Mel, I know in your case, and I assume with David and Seth too, you've got, in some cases, employees that have been with you for decades and multiple generations. How do you manage that internally? How do you think about that?
I was recently talking to someone who was just starting a business, and they're starting to do these really cool vehicle builds. They were saying, I'm jealous of you. You have this like legacy business that you get to be a part of. And I'm like, I'm jealous of you. You get a clean slate, right? Reminded me of the conversation when my kiddo was little. He's an only child. So he was like, you mean you have people to play with? And the other kid had like 4 kids at home. He's like, you mean all these toys are yours? But like the grass is always greener on the other side, because honestly, there's a lot of pressure about legacy. It's like, this was a passion project of my great grandfather's. Come into work every day and I sit at my great grandfather's desk. And so there's a part where like it is like so integrated into like everything here. And I am incredibly lucky to have this like brand that's awesome and a legacy. And also like I went to school for psychology. Like I've learned on the job, but like this is like a job that like you don't necessarily like exactly know how to do it. I'm learning as I'm going. And luckily I am a lifelong learner, but that is like the part that there is a lot of pressure in the legacy. And I won't lie, like it has kept me up at night sometimes because I really want to do well. I want to make my grandpa proud. Like I remember when he was alive, he'd come in and he was fascinated. Like he wanted to know where that pallet was going of product or where, and sometimes we were shipping it overseas and he was just like, couldn't imagine it because he was selling door to door when he first started. They work so hard. And luckily that work ethic has continued through all the generations. There was a lot of hard work. And I remember one conversation with him is like the first few years of business, like he had 5 examples every year of why they should have gone out of business, right? Like when you think about that, and here we are like 79 years later, it's like, okay, there's a lot there that we carry. I think all of us, all 3 of us probably carry on our shoulders.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like the respect for like the other generations that had built something. And I can kind of share even going back, like for me at one point, I was struggling, like, should I come into the business? Because was it like, my grandfather built it, started it, my dad, built it successfully. And then it's like, are you just like the owner's son who's coming in and what do they know? And are you contributing or are you just getting? And that was a big deal for me. Like times I even thought like, do I want to go do something on my own because I got to prove it on my own versus coming into my family business. I don't remember who shared it with me or the perspective, but it was really like, no, all they've done is build an incredible foundation and you'll add to your path and to the company's path and you'll create what it is. And employees will know if you're contributing or just riding on like coattails. That's probably something that was always really important to me was I felt like I had more pressure on myself to prove to employees and improve to customers and key stakeholders that like I'm taking this serious. And that's the same for my sister. Like there is no doubt in my mind, she comes in and she's here because she wants to win and grow the business, but also carry the legacy and create new opportunities for our employees. I mean, you're right. When we have 250 employees, which means we have 250 people that we're responsible for one way or another. And you should never take that lightly.
It's interesting. Our employee number one, all the way back to 1978, is still with us. Debbie Juzak, who is our HR director. She started with us in Brooklyn, and then she moved to California with us, and then she moved to Tennessee. Her husband, Marion, started working for us in 1982. They met through our business and got married. And there are quite a few others that have been with us for decades, as you mentioned, Dan. And Debbie's known me since I was 4 years old. We joke a lot about her playing hangman with me in the conference room when I was 4. In the very first building we had, that building that I was telling you about. So there are some people where they just fit really well into a family business. I will say that a family business is probably a little bit different than a non-family business or a publicly owned business. And I don't want to totally sugarcoat anything either. Some people aren't a fit for it, and business is hard and employment is difficult and there's good and bad and tough situations. And something that Seth touched on that really resonates with me is just the feeling of responsibility. It's something that my parents always had and really have instilled in me, and you just can see it with the way that we treat our facility and anybody who's in it, even beyond just employees. It's not very different from walking into my parents' house, walking into our building, just because it's a place of business. It's just a very similar feeling. It really works very well for a certain type of personality and a certain mindset. And those are the people that we still have and that grow with us. And it's a really beautiful, warm thing. It can just be really lovely. And we have quite a few that have been with us longer than I've been working full time, and I've been here for 24 years. So you treasure that. And because of that, there's a lot of tribal knowledge too that kind of comes along with that. And that's extremely valuable. It's tough to document everything and your whole history and all the knowledge. So a lot of what makes us special is the work that those people have done and their knowledge base and this sort of chemistry, I think, that comes along with it. You kind of learn how to work in that regard. It's a big part of our success.
Really cool. And also that one employee is coming up on 50 years. That's amazing.
Yeah, no,
Wow.
it's insane. I mean, she's a family member. I mean, and her husband too.
That's really cool. Well, that kind of leads me to another thing I was kind of wondering about. So I grew up in a multi-generational family business with a dad who was probably more transparent than he should have been at the dinner table and would talk openly about, even when we were kids, when they were having a really good year, we knew about it and he would talk about it, and there'd be a crazy new car in the garage and a boat at the harbor and everything was very good. And when things were not good, he would talk openly about it, and we knew that too. And I've mentioned this on past episodes. I have a very clear memory of being like 7 or 8, and I don't know what was going on at that time, but they had a tough year. And I remember just like my dad was just sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, just trying to figure out how to make payroll. And at that point, the company was already like 40 years old. So they were still, you have good years and bad years. And I remember as a kid thinking to myself, because I grew up in that environment, I don't ever want to do this. Entrepreneurship seems horrible. I want to get a job. Like, I want to go work for a big company and just like go get a job. So,
Well, clearly you didn't listen to yourself.
well, I didn't.
because-
No, I'm an idiot. And so like, but that's kind of my point is I think most entrepreneurs that I talk to say they didn't know what they were getting into. And then all of a sudden they're in it and they're like, oh, I guess this is just the deal. And I just have to have really thick skin and you've got to be kind of masochistic and you've got to just be able to take a lot of hits and keep pushing forward. But with you guys, you kind of knew what you were getting into and you still signed up for it. So was that something that appealed to you or was it something that scared you or was it just like a non-issue?
I think that for me, it varied a lot as I grew up. I had moments where I felt like I didn't want to be a part of it. I had moments where I did want to be a part of it. But there's a certain reality about tough times, like you're mentioning, Dan, when bullets are flying, and sometimes it's about survival and living to fight another day or however you want to articulate it, and for me, it was those challenging moments and getting involved in helping and realizing that I could make a difference and those feelings that sort of grew over time. In hindsight, I can look back at the whole thing and really put it in perspective. But I think when I was in the middle of it, I'm not so sure I always had a perspective like that. It was just something that my affinity for it grew over time. It's not like I just woke up one morning and I was like, oh my God, this is it. It built inside me over time.
I would agree with David. It's the same thing. I mean, I wasn't sure if I was going to come into the business. And actually, my uncle, dad ran this business together. And in '04, he passed away. I was living in Colorado. I was like in that crossroads in your life of like, I was out of college, I was working. Am I coming back into the business or am I going on a totally another path? And it was really interesting. Sunday night, my wife and I had dinner after volunteering somewhere. And she asked me, like, what do you think your life would have been if you didn't come into Malco? What track would you have gone? And it was like this such insightful conversation. I mean, we talked for like an hour about where it would have gone and what she would have done. And she's also one of the reasons why I'm back here. I mean, as well, because it's just kind of how our paths came together. I chose to come back. So my uncle passed away. And I remember talking to my mom. And I am just waffling back and forth. Do I go into the business or do I go under my own path and see where it goes? And I remember her looking at me and just saying, Seth, there is no guarantee 10 years from now, if you decide you want to come back into the business, that the business will be there. And what makes you think that you could just, like, your dad's ready to step down and you can just walk in and run it? She was like, if you think that, you're totally wrong. And I remember, like, I was like, Mom, like, I called my dad after that conversation and I was like, Dad, I'm coming into the business and I'm going to give you 5 years. I'm not going to try it. I'm giving you 5 years. And like 2 years into it, I was like, oh, I'm hooked. Like it's kind of what David said. Like it was just, oh, this is my career path. Here I am 20 years later. My sister's in the business and I've been married 15 years to my wife and it's awesome. And she has so much more. Like I thank her too, because it's like I wouldn't be here where I am today if it wasn't for her and probably that conversation with my mom.
It's pretty cool. Mel?
Remember, my family didn't talk about it at family dinner
Yeah.
at the table. So I felt like I walked in pretty naive to some of the challenges, right? But one of the things right after I got out of college, I remember very distinctly reading the Wall Street Journal. I was thinking about what I was going to do next. And I was reading the Wall Street Journal and I was like hooked. I was fascinated. Like business is like always changing, evolve or die, right? There's like so much that happens in it. And I remember being like, that sounds fun. That sounds challenging. I want to do that. So sometimes like when I think about it now, it's like, gosh, that is happening, right? That is the truth of business is that you do have to be constantly evolving. And had I known that, I don't know that I would have signed up for it, right? It is like, you are put through the ringer. It shows you what you're made of too, in a lot of ways. Like, David, you were talking about your parents in the beginning and Dan, like, making payroll, your dad, like it shows you that you can figure it out. A friend of mine who he has a beautiful way to say it, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but most people will give you permission to give up in some of the situations in business, right? And as a business leader, none of your friends would judge you for it. But that's where I think really it shows you your character that, okay, this is really hard. Everyone would give me complete permission to give up at this point, but I'm not going to. And I think that's really where that decision is, whether you're starting your own business or in a legacy business or generational, right? Business is not easy, right? There's going to be challenges all the time. And so it really does show you that you can do hard things.
That's a really good point. Speaking of doing hard things, one of the things I wanted to ask all three of you about, I won't be so blindly arrogant as to say that we're the first generation to deal with tough stuff, right? There's been challenges in business for as long as people have been exchanging goods for services. But it seems like we are living in a time right now that's very disruptive. And the media landscape has kind of imploded and sort of reassembled itself in this other new thing. As of today, when we're recording this, there's tariffs going into effect all over the place. The distribution channel in the automotive aftermarket has been totally disrupted and transformed over the last couple of years. There's certainly been on the regulation side of things, we went from having almost no issues in the 60s to CARB in the 70s and 80s to the EPA actions over the last couple of years. So there's just all this stuff that's sort of happening that we all have to deal with at different levels and in different businesses. But it feels like right now, from distribution to marketing to even like rep groups used to be a huge thing in the industry, and that's less of the case today. And there's just so much change. Since all three of you are in senior leadership positions in your company, as you were sort of making that transition into senior leadership, how did you prepare the company for the future while also having to sort of take as much knowledge as you can from those that came before you without offending anybody, if you know what I mean? How do you manage both the relationship with your parent or, the generation before you, while also saying hey, the way we always did it maybe isn't going to work tomorrow. So we have to prepare for new ways. How do you manage that? How do you balance that?
It's a tough balance. And that's a really good question and a really relevant question. In some ways, it's a good thing because you have these multi-generations, or in my case, 2 generations. When you're sort of aligned, the sum of your experiences and your perspectives kind of put together can be really powerful and be really, really an advantage in a lot of ways. But there are also times when they conflict with each other. The key is communicating. And I think that there's always sort of honesty amongst family, and you try to keep that honesty and that realism with the whole thing. And my dad used to have a saying, and I'll maybe not say it directly, it's more paraphrasing, but just something about no matter what was going on, he'd say, look, if we were worried about stuff or what are we going to do, or didn't have a real long-term vision of how we were going to get out of whatever situation we were in, he'd say, look, we're going to get up tomorrow and go to work like we always do, And that would sort of be the end of that conversation for that day, and we'd get up tomorrow and maybe a little bit earlier than we did the day before and get in there and work through it. Try to work together and try to be respectful of what each one of us brings. It can change. The dynamic can really change. And I don't know what it's like for you guys or what it's been like for you guys. Really, we're still figuring it out. We got to figure it out every day, and I'm not sort of ashamed of that. I think part of our success has come from modifying our strategy sort of in real time as we go. We lost my father sort of unexpectedly and didn't have a plan for that, and my mom and I couldn't breathe when that first started, never mind sit down and document the path forward. We were struggling to breathe like anybody else. It just sort of, you work through it. You work through it.
Yeah, well said.
I will say that I did not do it well for a good set of years, where I really felt like I needed to know everything myself. And I, tuned out other generations, especially my dad, who is my partner now. I regret that. And also I course corrected. So I started to realize he has a lot to offer, and it wasn't a weakness by me going to him for information about history, for how did he work through different problems, by really letting my ego go a little bit. It's really helped not only our business partnership, but our relationship. He is a super smart guy and he thinks through problems. He's gone through a lot, and I'm really lucky to be able to lean on him. And he still comes in every day. I swear he's just hiding from my mom's honey-do list, but he still comes in. But it's awesome because, he's right there for me to ask him questions, tap into that knowledge. But I'm not the only one. And so I think it also is really beautiful how he can share that with other people here, and he mentors other people here at the plant, and how special that is. Like, he's a great guy and can share that information. And so I'm glad I course corrected in my process.
So I would say a couple things. One, our company, 53, it's like reinvented itself probably like 5 times. So we started as doing like cleaning chemicals that were sold to dairy distributors, on the janitorial side, only like you don't get milk dropped off at your house now. That's gone. Then we were selling automotive oil additives that were being sold into full service gas stations. And it created an opportunity when kind of the STPs all moved to the, mass merchants, and we kind of grew there. And then we moved into detailing products. So we were always a specialty chemical manufacturer kind of at our core. And we were focused on making and meeting needs of customers. But like, if you look at our business, there's probably like 3 or 4 times where it like kind of changed. And my dad always talks about like the paradigm shift and how things change and how do you adapt to it. So I would say like the organization itself, the reason why we're still around is because we kept adapting versus just like staying in one spot. And then I think the other thing is like just transparency. And whether that's transparency between our family members or my sister and I and my dad of where we want to take the business, but even transparency within our employees. I mean, we don't ever want to have our employees guessing where we want to go. And even when things are tough, like we meet with our employees and I meet with them. I learned this from my dad. I call it like our State of the Union address, but like 3 times a year, we have a meeting with every employee where we go through the financials and let them know like, hey, we're doing well or we're not doing well. You talked about like, well, you just roll up your sleeves and you're going to work through it together. And I think we've built that trust around it. But there's arguments too. And I mean, I don't know if Dan actually realizes this. So Kahn Media helped us with our rebrand. And I remember I was at a trade show with my dad. We're trying to decide on our new brand, which is this right here. And my dad didn't like a piece, like a design right up here. So you want to talk about like the challenges of a family business. So like my sister is in charge of it. Him and I are sitting at this trade show in Germany and he's telling me about it. And I'm like, well, you need to talk to my sister, but he's talking with me. We got some good triangulation going on. He reaches out to my sister. We get back 3 weeks later and, somehow like the communication really got messed up. And we're at the trade show. At SEMA. We're introducing the brand for the first time. And my dad's like, you can just tell he's like, it's changed, right? We had the same kind of brand design for 25 years. It's changed. And every customer is coming up and like gushing about how awesome the new brand looks, how we hit the mark. And it was all like I was a part of it. But this is where like my sister and the marketing team, Kahn and some other people, like they were really doing it. I got to have a say in it. My dad, I got to have a say in it. And I think what was so cool is my dad, like clearly my dad was uncomfortable with it. But after SEMA, he wrote my sister and I an email, and especially to Lauren, was like, you were right. I trust you. You hit the mark. I know, there was some disagreements of where we were going with it. That was the best piece is like, he looked at it and he said, no, like you guys did it right. There were times where like there was a disagreement or there was a challenge, but like then he could recognize what was accomplished. And he, wrote a really nice email to my sister and I about how like he knows the business is in good hands and he likes confidently where the direction of the brand's going. Probably that's what I took away from the most of it is like he could share back with us. And that was pretty cool.
That is cool. Also, I'm not going to lie, I was aware of the friction at one point. I was creeping at SEMA. I was standing on the edge of your booth watching your dad interact with customers. And I'm like, okay, this is good. Like, okay. Like, so that's cool.
And I remember I was like, Lauren, this is yours. You got to deal with this. Like, I won't lie. I was like, you know what? But I mean, she did a great job. So
that's cool. So one of the questions I also want to ask, and if you don't feel comfortable talking about this, that's totally okay. The 900-pound gorilla or whatever in the room, I think these days in almost any conversation about the automotive industry and the aftermarket. When I started doing this for 11, 20 years ago, almost every company was either privately owned or family owned. And that is definitely not the case anymore. Private equity and investment companies, by the way, many of which we work with, and they're good relationships. Some of these are really smart people, but it has changed sort of the dynamic of the industry for sure. And they've gone through, and there's been a lot of consolidation, and there's been a lot of, M&A and buying and selling and kind of outside money involved. And how does that interplay with you guys in multi-generational businesses? I mean, is that something that you even think about? I mean, I'm sure your phones are all ringing. And is that something that you think about to have in your back pocket? Is that something where it's like a badge of honor that you haven't done that? Is that something your employees ask about? I just wonder like how that, you're kind of in the minority at this point, I would think, of companies that are standing the test of time that haven't sold. So how do you think about that?
Well, we can say we're in the 1 percentile.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that without even knowing how Melanie and Seth feel about this, and just even taking us out of the equation, just talking about it in theory, we sort of represent something different, right? Because we don't really have to kind of go down that path. If there is no second generation or third generation or next generation, the generation that's in that seat at that time, their hand sort of gets forced to a certain extent, right? Because they got to do something with it. And so I think at the very least, we represent sort of an option to not have to do that. So there's a sort of beauty to all that in a way, I think. But to not have to do it, that's an important part of the equation. I think that there's another side of it. We talk about sort of tough times. I remember there are times where my parents were like, we don't want you to have to go through this. The conversation sort of starts going in that direction because of how much they care about their kids and the next generation. And they say, well, we don't want you to have to suffer through these times like we have. As you sort of galvanize and you get through those tough times, then all of a sudden it becomes even more meaningful to not go in that direction. But I think something that's always given me, I don't know, just a sort of warm, fuzzy feel good, is that as my parents aged, my dad aged, my mom is aging, that her hand doesn't get forced because, the economy goes up and down and timing and all that stuff. And it's like, you're right. Between her and I, not a day goes by where we don't get a half dozen solicitations, for stuff like that. So I think internally, that's kind of the dynamic that there's been for us. But then externally, and I want to be sort of diplomatic and polite about this, hasn't always worked out for our competitors when the founder is no longer a part of it, and it seems like just sort of on average, and there are different outliers and stuff, but on average, as the founders and the family gets further and further away from it, they seem to become less formidable competitors for us. I know other industries are different, and there's good and bad with sort of, more resources and becoming part of a larger organization. But my dad always used to say that it's just something about our industry where individuals who are incredibly successful in other industries have come in and not had the same success. And some of it might be because what we do is kind of stupid in a way, not sensible. And if you try to apply too much classroom to it, I think maybe that can become problematic. I don't know if you remember the movie Back to School, Dangerfield. But there's a scene where he's in the business class. The business teacher's like trying to talk about building a business based on widgets or whatever, and Rodney Dangerfield's in the back, like rolling his eyes, like giving him the reality of like, what it's actually really like to run a business, and my dad was that kind of guy. And so, the dynamic is interesting. Clearly, like a lot of businesses have been really successful with this, and the consolidation has grown, some really powerful big brands in our industry. Somehow, even being privately funded and a family business and small, and we're able to hang in there. And I think that's because there's something unique about keeping it in the family.
Yeah, that's well said. I wonder if there is an advantage in what you're talking about, David, that I think privately owned businesses and especially family businesses can choose to make decisions that on paper would seem not like great decisions, right? Like,
absolutely. That's a better way of articulating what I was trying to say. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's like, hey, we're going to invest in new tooling, and we're going to come out with this new line, and it means we're going to probably not make a lot of profit this year. But we know it's going to pay off 2 or 3 years from now versus like a business that is completely focused on EBITDA. That would be insane, right? Like we could never do that. Like profit is all that matters. So it does give you a lot of freedom when you're taking a kind of a long game approach to it.
Yeah. And when you apply what you just said to the other discussions we were having about having this long history, you have this intuitive understanding where, I'm not like a big gut marketing guy. I really try to stay away from that and try to be data driven. But you're absolutely right, Dan. I mean, there's just this sort of intuitive feel and knowledge that you have, especially as a family, having built this thing from nothing, this sort of knowledge and experience that transfers from one generation to another and just knowing what the right thing is to do and knowing when the right time is to take a little bit less profit, in order to invest in the long-term health of the business. The other thing too is like a lot of these PE guys or whatever are looking to flip the businesses every 2 or 3 years. So they don't care what's going to happen in 7 or 8 years to the business. Whereas like we kind of don't necessarily have that mindset. So we can play the long game, even sort of understanding the numbers.
That's a good point. I also think in all three of your cases, you've got customers that I know also, I think, really care about the story of the parts and the products that they're using, right? That is another weird thing about our industry. It's like, I don't really care about the backstory of my multivitamin, or my like toothpaste or whatever.
Totally.
Like, it's just like, whatever. It's like a thing in my drawer. I just take it out, whatever. It's fine. But like if someone's going to spend several $1,000s on an exhaust system, or they're going to go spend their hard-earned money on a whole new shelf of car care products or sway bars for their pickup truck. Like there's an emotional engagement involved in that purchase. It's a want, not a need, right? And so they want to sort of believe in the brand. I don't know if that's the case in other industries as much as ours.
I think you're absolutely right about that. There's no question about it. I mean, look, in our case, and the majority of exhaust systems we sell go on a vehicle that has a perfectly good exhaust system on it already. Like there's really no reason to take it off and put ours on. And it's the story. We're storytellers, I think.
That's a good point. Mel, Seth, what do you think? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that for sure it is that, right? It's not just it's the connection that you have to the company, what you were asking about in investors, right? And I think we're all really lucky. I know there are some businesses that don't have the opportunity to have a next generation, or like they burned them out at the dinner table, like maybe your dad did, right? There isn't always that next opportunity. And luckily we are all there and here to like be able to take that on. I take a lot of pride in the fact that we're a family owned, multi-generational, but I think it goes more like our family motto, we do the right thing. And doing the right thing isn't always easy, right? And that is also a very like long play versus a short play. It has given us the freedom to always think about doing the right thing. We have a lifetime warranty. My grandpa was really proud of like our customer service efforts. That isn't something that you can continue if you're only concerned with short-term gain. So I think that is something that I just wanted to make sure I touched on, is that it adds so much value, but it's also that like it adds that value and like that connection as well, right? We have customers who know we're going to do the right thing. They have the relationships with us, right? So not only is that a part of our story, it's part of our relationships with our vendors and our customers.
I was thinking about the customer relationship side of it too. I want to be accessible for a guy who buys a clamp from us. I want to make myself accessible. You have a problem with it, or you have some sort of an issue, or you want to know something, I am truly available. I treasure being able to do that. It's the foundation of the family side of it that really makes that a reality.
And I agree with both of you. I mean, when I was listening, to David and Dan asked the question, I mean, I wrote down lucky, and you just think about it, right? So, Melanie, you said you were one of 9 kids, right? Or no, grandkids, one of 9 grandkids. So there were 9 chances. 8 said we're not interested in the business. You chose and had the ability and capability to come in. David, same thing for you. We had 4 chances, right? It was my sister and I and my 2 cousins, and my uncle passed away, and they, didn't get, if they wanted the opportunity, I know my dad would have welcomed them in the business, but there was a major life event that changed for them. And then Lauren and I decided to join the business. I kind of think about my dad, like he is lucky that he had 2 people that were capable. I like to think he would have been also strong enough to say, hey, my kids aren't capable. I'm not putting you in that role, because there is a loyalty to our customers, our employees, and even the community. We're very philanthropic to the community. And like, if my sister and I weren't capable, he would be not doing justice to all those things and even the legacy like my grandfather started with. And then I agree on the personal touch. I mean, we literally today announced an acquisition, and my sister, myself, a lot of our team members, we personally called all of our customers so they could hear it from us versus getting an email. So last night at 8:30, I was calling a customer and I was like, hey, it was actually a small customer. They didn't do a lot with us, but they're a big customer of the other, brand that we were acquiring. And I called the guy and I was like, hey, I know I haven't talked to you in probably 4 years. I remember having breakfast with him, or no, lunch with him out in California. But I was like, I just want to call you and tell you this is happening. And I want you to hear it from me. And there's going to be a lot more information that comes out. But you talk about, David, that accessibility. I mean, our customers have family businesses too. When you talk about the PE thing, and yeah, I get called, I probably get an email a week. I can tell people I'm 44 and I like what I'm doing. And there's a lot of I don't know, it's probably a combination of loyalty and responsibility that I was like, I don't know, worry about it in 20 years. And to be honest, I hope that, whether it's myself, my kids or my sister's kids, they'll have the opportunity, and we'll see if they have the capability. I don't know.
It's really fun to hear the two of you talk. So many similarities. And I'm even learning a little bit about myself listening to the two of you, but just something I'm sort of struggling to think about how to articulate. I think gratitude and responsibility really resonate when I hear you guys talking about those two things. But both of them, and they kind of overlap in ways. There are times when somebody will ask me, how's business? First thing that pops into my mind, no matter how good or bad it is, first thing I usually say is I'm lucky to have it. I really, truly feel that way all the time, no matter what's going on.
And I remember, I used to get my friends would razz me. You think about it. You had Chris Farley from Sandusky.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
it was what was it? Tommy Boy,
Yeah.
Callahan
brake pads.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, son of the owner from Ohio, automotive business, So now I don't have a partner in David Spade, either.
Well, you guys set me up perfectly for my next question, which is that I think all four of us actually have kids that are pretty close in age, within 4 or 5 years of each other. And because you're right, a point was just made in the last question that a lot of my clients and friends that sold in that first wave, like 10, 15 years ago when companies first started selling in our industry, were mostly kind of the boomer founders that didn't have someone who wanted to get involved in the business. And a lot of them had kids. They just had kids that weren't interested. So they had nobody to, they wanted, and I mean, we're talking about Vic Edelbrock's and Barry Maguire's and people that are Corky Cokers that were very successful, built really impressive businesses, and they just didn't have anyone in their family that said hey, put me in, I want to be involved. And so they sold. So I do think that you guys are all in a really cool position that you were able to do that and continue the legacy. So I wonder, how do you approach this with your kids? And how do you think about it? Or do you? How does that? They're all young, right? Nobody's got a 20-year-old at home, but how do you approach that? How do you think about it?
I feel like I get this question a lot. I think I'm the oldest out of 15. And I often, because I'm fourth generation, I often get asked if Jensen's going to come into the business, my son. And right now I'm like, oh, that would not be good, right? Because he's 15 and he's maybe not as responsible as I would like him to be. But I think I want to do the same for my parents. I want him to have the freedom. I mean, we have this one life, right? This one precious life. And I want him to do something that he loves. Luckily, I love doing this. I have been so grateful for the amount of growth opportunity, the amount of opportunity. I'm incredibly lucky for this. I want him to have the same. If he wants to come do that here and he is capable, right? He has the right skill sets and what Hellwig needs, then I think awesome. But if not, I just want him to be happy. If he, I don't know, wants to go mow lawns or whatever, I want my kid to be happy. I don't want him to feel the pressure of coming into the business. And I think that was a gift my parents gave me and my grandparents. I want to be able to give that to him. Is just, to find his own passion.
But do you think you going to work and liking what you do, it also probably doesn't hurt that you're dropping your kid off at school in Raptors and Fox Factory trucks and stuff?
It does not hurt.
No, it doesn't hurt. Cool mom. But you're also modeling hey, you can actually like your job. Not everybody's has parents who like going to work every day. I think most people probably don't.
I actually, weirdly, because we didn't talk about it, right? Business. I kind of grew up thinking I could be a teacher. Even when I went to college, you guys, I thought I was going to be a teacher. I could be a fireman, right? I just had a very, an accountant. I had a very limited view of what I could do. And so I've been trying to get Jensen to understand you could do anything. If you want to do something, I had this awesome opportunity as a summer ago to take him on a trip, and I took him, toured a couple customers. And so he learned about those businesses. He kind of learned a little bit more about what I do too and what Hellwig does. So that was really cool. I also he got this own idea that he was going to start his own business because we met a lot of entrepreneurs on that trip. My biggest thing is exposure. I want him to know that there is a lot of opportunity out there, and then he can find his own niche. But it doesn't hurt, Dan, that I'm exposing him and I'm visiting a customer and he lets me drive his 911. That's really hard to get my kid talk about encouraging versus discouraging. He's gotten a lot of experiences that are pretty dang cool.
That's cool.
I have a 7 and 9-year-old now. My oldest just turned 9. They're all about working for the business. I mean, if you ask them, that's what they're going to tell you they want to do. But of course, having the perspective we all have, we all know how many things would have to line up perfectly to make that happen. So I think that for all of us, and including my mom, and it's a beautiful thing to think about. There's so many nuances and realities, and it feels a little bit like one of those math equations where there's a train traveling 40 miles away and you have a golf ball and the window's open and you got to hit the golf ball through the window of the train moving. It's there's that complicated to actually, kind of make it happen. You just sort of be patient about it and, let them grow and see what they take to. And let's face it, got to keep the business moving and keep the business going too, to make that a reality. And I have a lot of the same feelings that I was talking about earlier about how my parents would say, we don't want you to have to suffer through this, and have those feelings too. Then on the flip side, the thought of non-Borlas running this company or being involved in this company and not having any Borlas in the company is hard to think about too. Both are really hard to think about. Let's face it, I can't get them to take their dirty dish to the thing. So it seems like a pretty lofty thing for them to get involved in this. I got a long way to go before I can even think about it.
Right there with
you.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, mine are 8 and 12. What I want to do is hopefully have the option or the opportunity for them. I want them to be able to find their path and their passion. And then if that brings them back to Malco, then great, they might have that opportunity. But I mean, a lot of things have to align. And I know, Dan, if you ask my mom and dad when my sister and I were in college, what do you think the odds are that, Seth and Lauren are going to come back into the business? I mean, my guess is they would have said low. I think they were going to say, oh, Seth and Lauren are going to be living in Colorado. They're going to be doing Lauren's a teacher. Seth's, I don't know. I'll have to ask them what they thought I would be doing. Probably something in the outdoors industry, to be honest. You look at it now and it's we're both rooted in Ohio. We're rooted in our community. That responsibility and even loyalty to our customers, our employees, and our family. I mean, we're here. You're right. I mean, David, you're right. I mean, there's so many things has to happen. I mean, maybe you can plug the algorithm into Chat GPT and it'll tell you what you have to do to do it. But the reality is so many things. And who do they meet as a partner in life? Where do they go to college? There might be some random event that totally puts them on a different path. So many things have to happen for us to get, 5th generation, it'd be 3rd generation. Who knows?
And then also my dad, if he had followed and just did exactly what his dad did, this company would probably not exist. Nothing lasts forever, right? It would be sort of boring if everybody just did what their parents did in the whole world, right? There's sort of a reason why that doesn't happen. So you want to keep the door open for sure for your kids to do something really special on their own. I wouldn't want to limit their scope of possibility now or at any point.
That's a good point. I've even approached the car thing like that with my kids, where it's I'm going to go do my thing at work and I'm free time if I have any free time, which is rare. I still end up usually doing car stuff, but I don't push it at all. And my daughters have zero interest. My son just likes loud stuff. So he'll keep you in business, David. But I don't push any of it. I'm hey, look, if you want to go pursue a path in crocheting or whatever, go do you. If you want to come to it organically, you do it. If you don't, no big deal.
It takes a certain mindset, a certain skill set, a certain type of psychology, to do this. And if it's not a fit, there's just no reason to project any kind of guilt on them or expectation in that way.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And all that stuff, I mean, I think we touched on it, all three of us. We all developed that over time. I don't think that any of us, from what I hear from you guys, at 8 years old, it was obvious at that moment that we were going to wind up here.
I actually have the D&B from like 1954. The company was founded in 53. I keep it in my office, and it talks about, the company being worth $1,000. The assets and equity was my great grandfather, who at one point owned a bar. Then he sold it and had a pinball company, then sold it and had I forget what else, but it was it almost like grounds you of where the company came from. And I was actually going to look for it because it was just every once in a while I'll pull it out and read it. And it's like, wow, like the assets to the company was less than $1,000,
That's David's golf ball through the train window analogy.
Yeah.
That the fact that you
totally.
ended up there, that's pretty interesting.
You talk about like the story and the history, and like the only thing we're bad at is we don't tell the story. We don't have to make up our story. It's an incredible story. And I would say the same for both of you. We have these unbelievable history, for us, and why we're connected to, Kahn Media is we just need to tell it. We were just too humble to ever share it. We just wanted to make really good products.
And sometimes you lose sight of the fact because it's so intrinsic inside of you. You can lose sight of the fact that it's a beautiful story and people care and want to hear it. And it still surprises me when I talk about the history of the company that people are engaged and actually want to hear about that. I need to be reminded of it.
And people care about that. I think they like that. They like hearing that story. Well, guys, this has been awesome. As we kind of wind this down, first of all, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've gotten a lot out of it. A question I ask every guest on the show, and it's rooted in my own experience, that I do not have an MBA, and I tend to learn things the hard way. That's how I learn every lesson. So a question I wanted to ask all three of you is, as you think back on your career, what is the biggest mistake you made and what'd you learn from it?
Regards to this conversation, I'll say the biggest mistake I made was not leaning more on the generations before me, trying to prove that I knew everything myself, right? You can't. So leaning more on them, that was one of the bigger mistakes that I've made in my career. And I miss that because my grandpa's not here, and I could have really leaned on him a lot more. And I think he would have just loved the conversation too.
This is not the biggest mistake I've ever made, but I think it's kind of a metaphor of really early on, I joined the business, and I remember my dad gave me a notebook, and for 2 weeks he was like, just walk around, ask questions, be inquisitive. And I remember 2 weeks later, I came back and he was like, so what'd you see in the business? And I think we were talking through it. And then he was like, I started as an engineer in the plant. So he was like, and it was basically on the third floor. So we've got first floor is manufacturing, second floor is manufacturing, third floor is 35 tanks that are, anywhere from 500 gallons to 5,000 gallons. And we have all this inventory up there. And I remember talking to him, and I was like, this just seems really inefficient. And so he was like, well, that's your first project. Now, figure out how to make it more efficient. And I remember talking with all the employees, and, I'm just this black and white engineer. I don't really know anything other than what I've learned in a book. We designed this whole racking system for our raw materials. Okay. So it's going to flow much better. And I buy this $70,000 lift truck because the racks have to be narrow. Okay. And I remember going up there 6 months later, and there's literally no hours on the lift truck. And I'm like, what the hell? No one's using this lift truck. We bought it. It was $70,000. How are you not using it? And they're like, well, we can use the regular forklift. And if we just back it up, the racks are higher than the back of the truck. So there's actually enough room for them to just back it up and pull straight in and lift the pallet of raw materials out and bring it in. But on AutoCAD, it was they were walls. Clearly there was not enough room. Yeah, you could say it was a mistake. It was a $70,000 mistake, which is real money. But the lesson was, I never asked the people that the employees, the people that drive the forklift every day, and how's this going to work, and how's it going to work in reality and with experience versus just on paper. When you think about the mistake, it really was you have to trust your people. You have to trust the people that do the job and work in the environment, and you have to listen. And that was an eye-opening moment for me of just really listening and understanding how it will impact someone's work environment or impact a customer. The decisions we make, so many ripples that they can create. And so I don't want to call it as much as a mistake as just an incredible lesson aha moment. And I give so much credit to my dad, because that was like one of those, like, yeah, at the end of the day, like we transferred it to another plant or maybe we sold it, but like we really wasted money. Like it was a piece of equipment we didn't need to buy.
Yeah, learning from your employees is a good one.
You know, and I'm thinking back on this, I made a lot of mistakes. It's hard to
Yeah, it's like how do you pick one?
a lot of hard lessons, and and so there are quite a few things I can think about that I was like, God, I shouldn't have done that, or that was a mistake, or missed opportunities where I should have done that and I didn't. But I think when I look back, and maybe sort of twisting this into something else, but when I look back and think about what I should have done differently or what I would have done differently, knowing what I know now, particularly with my dad being gone, it's just not savoring this experience. I was always, sort of had this youthful anxiety almost to kind of get to the next stage. And I look back on all these levels and phases of the business as we grew and all the ups and downs that we went through. And if I could do it again, or what I think I missed most was not really being in present time and savoring the experiences that came and being a little bit more patient. I think that for me, if I could do it again, that's what I would change.
Yeah, boy, that one hits. Well said. That probably applies to most of us too. Well, you guys, I've really enjoyed this time. So thank you all very much. For those listening at home that want to learn more about you and your company, Mel, we can kick it off with you. Where do they go and what do they do?
We're on all the social channels with Hellwig Products. And then our website is hellwigproducts.com.
Same, we're on everything. Our corporate is malcopro.com. There's also malcoautomotive.com. So if you're ever at a trade show or in Ohio and you want to stop by, there's nothing better than giving a tour or meeting someone. So I always love talking to people and learning about their story. And Dan, thanks for setting this up.
You bet. David?
You can find us at borla.com, at borlainduction.com as well. We're on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube as well. And if you want to reach out to me directly, my email address is davidb@borla.com.
You guys were all so generous with your time and knowledge. I really, really appreciate it. And I know the listeners will too. Thank you very much. Sincerely, I was really looking forward to this one. Well, that is a wrap for this episode of Only the Strong Survive. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who'd appreciate these insights. Thank you all for listening. I'll catch you next time.